in our employee benefits. Certainly Ms. Clark serves on that committee, so it's a great celebration for our employees and our district. Next, we have deletion of certain items report. Next, we have the bid renewal for plumbing, flooring, water waste treatment, as well as small-scale construction. And you can see those bids there. Next is our pre-qualification of contractors. Okay, several projects going on within the district. The first one is Route 2 High School's roof repair for Building 2. Next is Bannerman Learning Center's parking lot renovation, security lighting within Bannerman Learning Center. Next is a direct purchasing change order, which saves money for the district for Keystone Heights Elementary classrooms and cafeteria. In other words, if we buy the products ourselves, we get to save the tax on that and saves the cost of the district. Okay, now we're heading into the fun part. Okay, there's 6 or 7 items that all deal with when you open a new school. There has to be some adjustments to property, etc., related to it. So I'm going to do my best to explain what that means in plain English. Lance Addison's here in case there are questions related to it. So the very first one deals with the opening of Spring Park Elementary School, and this is a conveyance of 0.25 acres from Peters Creek Investments to the school district. So this is a strip of land in the front of where the school is that butts up against 315. And so one of the challenges is when that happens is that strip is going to be used for other purposes, such as easements for electrical, easements for water, etc. And in order to make that all correct and all right, this strip is being conveyed to us as the district. You know, in other words, they're giving us this strip of land. We're accepting this strip of land from them because we're going to go ahead and turn around later on and give the same piece of land to the county, so that the county can then put the turn-ins for the school, as well as the stacking of the cars that has to occur for all of that. So this is pretty typical when there's new construction. And you're going to see that many of these items are related to this one item. There's 3 or 4 that are kind of connected to this. So this one basically says, hey, they're giving us a piece of land and we're accepting this piece of land. And it's the piece of land, it's the strip in front that borders from the front of the school to where the road begins. All right? So then the next one, what that does is it gives permission, creates a permanent easement so they can provide water, essentially, to the new school. So it creates this permanent easement, which would include part of the piece of property mentioned in first one. Okay? So that's Clay County Utility Authority, the easement for that. The next one, same sort of theme, but it's for electricity, for Clay Electric. They have the same thing, the access and easement related to Spring Park Elementary. Then the next one is a temporary construction easement. This is granting temporary construction easement to the county, because what has to happen is you can't say to the county, hey, you're doing this work, but we're not going to let you step foot onto our property. There has to be an easement for them to do the work that they need to do in order for us to have the school ready to go in August. Next is an interlocal agreement between the district and the county for the building of a right-of-way that explains the expenses and responsibilities for both parties. So basically, anything that's contiguous to the school is paid for by the district. In other words, anything that touches our land, and then anything that's not contiguous to the school is then paid for by the sidewalks, et cetera, that kind of thing. Next is totally different topics. So all of those are kind of related, right? You can see how they're all related, the conveyance of a piece of property, we need to have an easement for electric, for water, et cetera. This next couple deals with Lake Asbury Elementary and Lake Asbury Junior High. This is the conveyance of 0.75 acres. And basically, they're going to be expanding the road right there in front. And what's going to happen is there's going to be additional sidewalks for student safety in that area, which is a really good thing in that area. There'll also be some adjustments to the current retention pond that's in front of there. There's also a retention pond that goes along the property line of it. So the reworking of this would take away the retention pond that goes along the side of the property. It would expand slightly the size of the retention pond that's in the front now. As you expand the road, then the need to have more places for water to go is part of the gig, and so that's part of what this is talking about.
Is this Sandridge or is this Henley?
Sandridge. It's Sandridge, right up to the intersection at Henley.
Okay.
Next is a license agreement with Clay County for Lake Asbury for their improvements. This allows them to come onto our property to ensure harmonization of the project. So for example, if they're regrading the road and our property starts right here, you don't want to say to them, you can only go to our property, right? Because when you're grading the road, you're going to have to come onto our property to ensure proper grading and what we're referring to as harmonization, right? You just don't want them to stop physically right at the line. They're going to have to go onto our property to do some of the work. And that's what this allows them to do.
Mr. Brodsky, is it just sidewalks? Or is there going to be?
They're going
the road, right?
They're expanding the road, yes ma'am.
Is it to 4 lanes or like a turn lane to get in and?
There's turn lanes and.
An extra lane. So
Say the last part.
An extra lane and a turn lane.
An extra lane and a turn lane. Is it an extra lane both ways?
I have to look at the I can't remember if it's on the going westbound, but I know going eastbound is, yeah.
So maybe not the side that's.
On the side of Winn-Dixie,
subdivision,
right, on
kinda
the
empty.
Winn-Dixie side, I don't think there is an extra lane, right.
All right.
Here's a map of that.
Okay, and the last one's temporary construction easement to Clay County for that same work. Okay, so you gotta give me temporary easement. So all of those are all related to 2 projects, one being Spring Park Elementary, one being Lake Asbury Elementary, Lake Asbury Junior High, because those 2 schools are so close to
Mr.
one
Ross,
another.
will those be during the school year?
No,
Just
they
summer.
were not, they started in the summer.
Okay, so we're not
Now-
worried about kids walking to and from school through construction?
Now, some of that retention pond work is about to begin. And maybe some of the Clay County property that they own, I believe they've begun some of that work, but actually blocking off the roads and all that, they haven't started that yet.
They're required to maintain safe walking conditions.
Okay.
If it does overlap any.
Will the students' families be notified? I just know there's a lot of kids that bike and walk by themselves in that area. Is there a way that we can
We
let
can
them
get
know?
with the school and push something out.
Just to make sure parents are aware that there's gonna be a change to the traffic pattern?
Oh, yeah.
May I ask real quick if, speaking of sidewalks, I think we talked about it before, but I assume Spring Park will have one out front? Do we know?
Yes.
Because I know there's gonna be a lot from Willow Springs when you go across that. I mean, I'd love to see the flashing.
It's on the Willow Springs side.
Okay.
Actually, in front of
To
the
walk,
school.
so there isn't
There's
one.
none in front of the school.
To walk down to the signal.
Okay.
But on the other side of 315, there will be the Willow Springs area that there will be subdivision.
Okay.
I think most parents can see what's going on around the neighborhoods, but
Yeah.
I just, as a responsible party in charge of those kids, I wanna make sure we do everything we can to make sure parents know changes and,
Sure.
can make
What's
adjustments.
the approximate time to completion in front of Lake Asbury, where they're fixing the lanes? You said it would start in the summer.
It would start in the summer, they're supposed to be complete in the summer. But as it goes along, we'll get more information on any delays or,
The goal would be prior to the start of school, so to
they are
minimize,
trying to get,
minimize
I drive there every
disruptions.
day.
oh, yeah,
I pick up
yeah.
people there every day, that's why I was wondering, they're trying to get it done before.
Trust me, they want to
Because it's
minimize
pretty-
disruptions
Yeah,
to
they
the
do.
school
They're
process.
good
county
partners.
that's doing it?
Mhm.
The actual county?
Yeah.
That's part of the bonded transportation program, so that's who's building that area
A
right
little
there.
faster.
And it's been in works for years, I mean, as far as the planning portion of this.
And the last one is for Shadow Lawn Elementary. And basically, there's a road that would go from Shadow Elementary, where Shadow Lawn Elementary, where the light is, would continue to go straight through. This is the conveyance of the property to ensure that that occurs. It's been a long time agreement. Now that work's gonna be done this summer, and their plan is to do the same thing, which is to have it complete during the summertime to minimize disruption to the school. I do have one additional topic, if you can kind of put those two photos up, Bonnie. One additional thing, just for the board's consideration is, we had a request for the purchase of property that
Do
we
you want-
own. And this, you're looking at Montclair Elementary, in the very back of Montclair. There's a little piece of that that's about a quarter acre. And if you can look in front of that, maybe you can use your cursor, Bonnie, to show the fence line of it.
Is that right?
No,
It's back a little bit further.
Way back.
So,
Come here, Lance.
I'm just gonna walk up here. Just gonna walk up.
Okay.
So there's a fence line right here, right there. And this is Montclair, this is the back of Montclair. There's a little quarter of an acre right here, and it's all fenced off. And the property owner back behind the school has requested, pending the approval of the board, whether you're interested or not, if he can buy this quarter of an acre from us.
And so, really, when I look at this, my thought process is, it's behind the fence of what we actually have, so it really doesn't, it's not being used by us at all, so,
Why do we have it?
because it was part of the original property,
Part of the original
Okay,
project.
And
and
so-
just clean cut it?
and we kind of clean
Well,
cut
it's
it
never been used, right?
off there, so it's not being used. So the reason why we bring this forward is to gain a little bit of consensus, why we can't vote at a board workshop before you go through the process of an appraisal and all of that kind of stuff. We wanted to know if the board had any objection towards selling that one piece behind the fence
Is that a sidewalk?
at Montclair.
It goes into the neighborhood behind.
Okay.
Should be that.
Because it's not our
There's one on
sidewalk.
each side that goes into Village Green.
Yeah.
There are two.
Would it impact the kids on the sidewalk going out to the
No,
neighborhood?
it's between those two houses.
So the blue area,
Only the blue
the
area.
rectangle?
Yes.
Or is it the odd shaped section?
Is it just the blue part?
No, it's the blue
Just the
area,
shaded blue
the
area.
rectangular
Okay.
area, I'm
So the
I'm sorry,
sidewalk
not the
would still be
rectangular area, but that
Trapezoid.
polygon area right there.
Way to go, Matt.
Math t-shirt.
And the precedent has been set before. I mean, we've had, there's been a request and we have no future use for that property, so.
We did it at Montclair, his neighbor, I guess they started talking.
We also did it with that little strip that went to Blanding Boulevard that separated, it used to be another access that might have been used, but I think in 19 or 20, we did that one, but.
But he's gonna be okay with like kids cutting through there, like with that sidewalk and stuff?
It already does it now.
Okay.
That's his backyard, so he's
Okay.
just
Bringing it
wanting
up.
to move the fence back a little bit further. And like Lance said, it's behind our fence, so we don't even maintain that area. It's our property, but we fenced it off and we don't maintain it.
Just a buffer.
It reduces our liability, it reduces our maintenance, so if
Less
we're not
weeds
using
here.
it, exactly.
Okay, so it doesn't, sounds like there's consensus.
$5 million then.
I'm not doing parties, so we can't really know
We'll
like
start
what we
there.
want.
We can start there.
Okay. day. All right, so we're good there. So now we're up to the discussion part of the agenda. Right now, there's no special actions at this point for this particular meeting. The first one is the public hearing related to the adoption of the K-5 math and 612 social studies adoption. Remember, this was already advertised. We've waited the 28 days. Now it's the public hearing for those materials. The next one is the public hearing related to the advertised amendments to the manual for library media services, as well as the manual for instructional resources. So again, we did the advertising previously. We waited the 28 days that we're required to wait. Now this will be the public hearing for the adoption of that policy. Next, we have the public hearing to approve the amendments to the School Board Policy 6.01. This is the annual architect engineering selection. Remember, this put the policy in line with the statute related to the amount or cost of a project to be in line with what the state statute said. Then the last one is not really a discussion item, but it was moved to discussion to this particular spot because you would have to approve the policy first before we could take the action on the last item. So the order of this is very important. So it wasn't moved to discussion for some sort of reason like we wanted a great discussion. It was moved there because you have to approve the policy first before we can take action on the policy, right? So it's kind of the, although a great discussion is always appreciated, right? But I'm just pointing that out. So this is the architectural services up to $4 million. Ms. Hanson sat on this particular committee and it lists all of the architectural firms involved in that process. And really what happened is, you know, the cost of projects is so high that our minimum is so low, it wasn't even in compliance with the state. And so that's kind of the reason why those are there. So any questions on any of the agenda items? Okay, so then let's move right into the code of conduct. So the code of conduct is a group of really about 20 people. We've asked Mr. Jones, Justin Jones, which you see over there, as well as Kevin Stacy, who are our hearing officers that you see every board meeting. They lead that work. That group meets. They go through the whole code of conduct, which is a big, long document. In discussion with the board, and just in our interactions, there seem to be 3 different areas of interest related to the code of conduct. There's all kinds of stuff, and the whole code of conduct will be brought back to you in future months. But because this committee is working on it, and they have 9 subgroups, 9 task force made up of the people that are in this committee, it's important for the board to recognize the big picture of what's happening with the code of conduct in preparation. Our goal would be to advertise it, to have the public hearing and have it approved in enough time for administrators to go through training this summer and then informing our parents when we come back to school in August. So we're to the point now where if there's any additional input related to these topics, you know, now would be the time to tell us, right, in the process. So it seemed like through discussion, wireless communication, i.e. cell phones, was one of those topics, as well as dress code, as well as restrooms. So that's what we're going to do now, is just have a conversation related to it. Let's start off with cell phones, wireless communication devices.
When we're done, Mr. Brodsky, if I had a couple other questions
Sure.
at the end, we can discuss that
Sure.
then?
Yeah, or about the code of conduct or about?
Yeah, code of conduct.
Okay. Sure. So let's talk a little bit about wireless communication devices. There's no doubt that communication devices are a part of everyone's life. You know, whether we like that or not. I can remember when I put off getting my own children cell phones and refused to text, by the way. I was an anti-texter. I said, hey, I'm gonna text you, Dad. I said, you will not. You will call me on the phone, because that's what real adults do. We talk to one another. We don't like text, right? And all that stuff. So I was very much a lot of pushback. But I also have to say, oh my, there's not a person in this room right now that doesn't have a cell phone on them. Right? The integration of the technology into our lives is definitely there, whether we like that or not. So then the issue of how to manage that at school becomes a challenge, right? We don't want to interrupt the learning environment for students. And so you'll take a look at this policy, and it puts some additional restrictions on it, such as the just the simple recording, audio recordings, right? You know that Florida is a two-party state in which you don't just record somebody against their knowledge or without their knowledge, right? So we added that portion of it. We also added a portion about the recording of fights and similar events to post them on social media. We felt like that was the group, the Code of Conduct Committee, felt like that was important because you see that prolifically in society. We also basically said, hey, these electronic devices should be silenced or powered off and out of sight once you enter the classroom. So from bell to bell in a class should be filled with engaging instruction. Shouldn't be using a cell phone during that time frame. It also kind of put on notice, a common sense thing would be the use of cell phones within areas of personal space, such as bathrooms, locker rooms, etc. And of course, one of the challenges there is that people are concerned about the recording or the videotaping or whatever in a restroom facility. And then it says students may not use wireless communication devices to accept or make phone calls or video conferencing during school hours. In other words, students taking video and then sending it, or being on a conference call, FaceTime, for example, during school hours because of the disruptive nature of that in the school environment. And this policy does not prevent students from using it in transition or during lunchtime. So the issue becomes, where do you draw the line? Clearly, the committee felt like you draw the line when it's instructional time, it's instructional time. And then we recognize that these things are occurring in society outside of that time. So with that in mind, I'll open the floor for discussion.
All right, who wants to start?
You know, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading here where it states, you can use your cell phone if there is not, am I reading this right? If there's no other technology available? Is that what that says? Or is this?
Yes.
Electronic during instructional time for educational purposes when no school issued technology is available.
And it's sanctioned by the classroom teacher.
So I got a question. Do they not all get Chromebooks?
In fact, most students would have the accessibility towards that, but we didn't want to put in the policy an definitive no, just in case there was a student that didn't have access to it. Not every school has one-to-one devices. It's close.
Do we not have computer labs? I'm just trying to make it fair for all students, because not every student has a cell phone. You know what I mean? So like if
Right.
a teacher's like,
So-
okay, we don't have Chromebooks and we can't go to a computer lab, everybody pull out your cell phone and I want you to look this up.
I would say that the odds of there being no technology for students are very, 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 very slim. I think what we tried to do in the policy was not totally ban it in case the teacher wanted to have them use a cell phone. And then in that case, you would then have the availability of perhaps students on their cell phone for a particular, a lot of times they use the survey, a surveying device, like a Kahoot that you saw at that kind of thing,
Yeah, the free engagement games and all that.
that kind of thing.
I'm
Now,
just trying to make it,
the
because
very-
there are more and more parents that are taking cell phones and more parents who are not allowing
I
their
believe
kids
that,
to have.
I believe that they would have access to an electronic device if they didn't have a cell phone. That can be arranged with the teacher.
My concern, in line with what you're saying about there being that have and have not feeling between students, where it becomes, well, I've got this iPhone and you've got that flip phone or whatever. It becomes a comparison, a distraction. But more than that, it's such a battle with students that if there is a discrepancy between teachers of how they manage cell phones in their classrooms, if the rule isn't held up in one classroom but it is in the other,
Consistent.
there's a bit of an undermining that happens there.
We could, if the board wants to move in that direction, basically say that there's no use of the cell phone, regardless.
That's what I'm more comfortable with. I think there's no reason for it to be out in the classroom when we have access across the board to district controlled devices that are equitable for every person in the classroom, and they have all of the blockers and software that keeps kids off of things that they ought not be accessing during the school day. And they don't have, I don't think, access to the camera on the computer to be taking pictures or whatever else might be happening in the classroom.
Nope. And again, I think the fear would be that and there was discussion about this very topic.
I'm sure.
Which is once you then put it in the hands, maybe some people unwittingly would allow that and then create that discrepancy.
Correct.
That goes in there. At
Correct.
the same time, we didn't want to restrict access if it truly was an academic endeavor.
I think there are ways to accomplish that without using a cell phone. So,
Okay.
did you have anything else, Ms. Smith?
Yeah, I have something.
Yeah, and then my only other concern was, I don't know how, and this would, I guess, be open for discussion as lunch breaks and transition between classes. That's normally when people text to meet up to fight, you know what I mean? They text to meet up. I get, like, sometimes you're like, hey, Mom, can you bring me my lunch? Hey, Mom, can you, I get that, but I also understand, this is also the time where something has happened in the classroom and that now they want to rally up a whatever, or I don't hands are the devil's workshop is what I think in my mind, and I don't know, that would be up to all of you to.
I'm a bit extreme when it comes to cell phones. I'll admit that. I'm with you. I told my kids, you'll never have one as long
I
as you're
had
in
I
mine.
had a cell phone that you had to press, but you had to press it 3 times for the direct letter for the text. For the longest.
Yep.
The old slide.
So that is my 2
Yeah.
cents on that.
So I'm in favor of adjusting that. I think it will be a bear to enforce for
I
administration.
think it'd be very challenging. One of the things I would point out to the board is that having a policy is one thing. The implementation of a policy is a whole nother, and I don't think the board wants to put itself in a position where you can't really enforce, or you have the adults spending all of their time doing this rather than teaching.
So is it easier to enforce during lunch than transition between classes? I'm just saying it's just.
So, I have some notes here, because I've done some research. And I'm just gonna speak candidly. It looks great on paper. It doesn't work. It just really doesn't work. And I'm gonna speak candidly for this reason. My first thought is, we have kids 6 hours a day. At what point do we start to 2020 in 2020 of 2,000 principals, 86% of principals believe that cell phones harm academic performance. I did not need a survey to tell you that that is true. People say, how do you not fully develop? They have done MRIs and studies on the brain to include gaming and cell phone use. And they know that a child's brain is incapable of handling all that stimulation during development. So you asked me what my point is. Do we put something on paper because it is less challenging and allow kids to get away with what they're going to do? They're going to use them anyway. It's going to be all the time. It will be disruptive in class. Some kids will have them, some kids will abuse them, some kids won't. I can tell you when you take away a cell phone, how disturbing that is to a child. They lose that entire academic period. You have to correct the child. The whole class hears the cell phone go off. I believe we have a real problem. In light of current legislation, and this probably will not come up the docket and pass right now, but current legislation, I believe it's Bill Education, I think it's 1620, I'm not sure, it's hard to track. If it doesn't pass now, it's going to pass. And basically what it says is that we know there is scientific evidence that cell phones harm our children. The legislation plans on making sure, which I do not have a problem with, that cell phones are powered off in a backpack. They're still there, they still have them. Every teacher has a phone. And so I want to talk about what you said. There is this impracticality about trying to lock down a cell phone policy. Every school is different. Some principals are better at managing cell phone use than others. I feel like there's an inconsistency. I feel like elementary school is a whole nother ball of wax that could have maybe stayed separately. But really what I want us to consider, I almost feel like saying I need to, when I was in the classrooms, I need to be the adult in the classroom. And I'm sorry if it offends a child, if I want them to act a certain way and do certain things. What I am asking is, I mean, we could lead the way in this, but we have these kids 6 hours a day. They have 18 other hours to be on their cell phones. There has got to be a way to not only be consistent about it, but make sure they're off and in a backpack. And we as adults need to figure out how we can be consistent and be serious. I believe if we involve parents, we disseminate information about the health hazards of cell phones and how it distracts our kids from academic learning, that we can get our community on board. But at some point, although it looks good on paper, I feel like we have a real problem and a real challenge. And I'm not sure if we can discuss that.
Of course we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I just need to feel.
So in regard to policy, what is the wording in the policy that you'd like to see changed? And perhaps we should hear from Mr. Jones, who led the discussion of teachers, administrators, parents on the committee as to what their thoughts were as to why we came to this conclusion that we're bringing here today. So I don't know if you want to start off.
Just to provide a little bit of historical context, there was a large revamping that was done on our current Code of Conduct and Handbook right around 2019. And one of the things that we were seeing throughout the country at the time was this notion of bring your own device. It's hard to remember and realize that really as recently as 2016-17, the number of Chromebooks and devices that we had for students to access on campus was quite minimal. And so in the course of 4 or 5 years, there's been a very large advancement in the rollout of technology. And so back in 19, what we did was implemented a bring your own device policy, with the notion being, and of course you'll remember this, that in a perfect world, in a perfect classroom environment, students would have the opportunity to utilize their device for academic exercises and academic activities in the classroom. And so since that time, of course, we've rolled out in many schools. I would say this is just, I'm throwing this number out there based on what I've seen, although we are not completely one-to-one at every school. Many schools, in fact, are, and most schools that are not are probably well above 90%. So there's a tremendous amount of access to technology now. So one of the things that as a committee we did was we felt we were actually taking a very large step in and certainly in the right direction, but a retraction back of using your own devices. And you'll notice at the very top of the page, we're not even dealing with a bring your own device policy. The goal being that students would not need to or be compelled to utilize their own technology in the classroom for all the reasons that were mentioned here today. You know, that's not a device that we monitor. We don't know what the kid is bringing into the classroom. We want them to use Clay County School District devices. And so we're actually making a big retraction, or that was the notion. And when doing that, you know, that's something over time I think that we felt like we were doing in a very scaled back way, but this is a pretty big step. Again, not to say step backwards, but a sort of a restriction, if you will, on utilizing your own devices when compared to what we were doing just really a few years ago. So I think
they're
it's
still using them everywhere. Lunchroom, transition. They're not developing any social skills. They've got their face in a phone, even at school. I mean, we're scaling it back, but we're really not, unless we make a stand about. I mean, some schools have the kids put the cell phones in their backpacks, and the principals are very serious about that. And it's actually the community has become accustomed to that, but it's.
I'm in favor of making that the rule is consistent across the board. And I was years ago, we had this discussion as a board.
I think that this policy does that, and perhaps discuss this year versus previous year, because there's been movement this year relative to this. We covered this over our training over the summertime. You will see just about every school, when they're communicating out to parents, is also communicating out the cell phone policy, which is for the cell phone to go out. So we've seen improvement this year relative to it. This locks it down more. We're in classroom, the in-classroom time frame. What I hear is kind of like the sticking point. I think we all agree on that portion of it, right?
Well, the silence part. Now we expect kids to remember how to turn it on and off, and I can barely do that when I come in here.
So,
We're gonna turn it on during hallway time, we're gonna turn it off. I just really cannot understand why a kid needs their cell phone on all day long. I cannot wrap my head around that.
Parents end up texting the kids quite a bit as well.
why don't we let Mr. Daly go ahead? This is your.
Interestingly enough, good morning. Interestingly enough, I just led a focus group with principals on this very topic, and there's to kind of give you the bullet points version of that conversation. Distinct difference between how elementary principals see this issue and how secondary principals see this issue. As a parent of 3 children on these things, was that cell phones aren't going away. They're part of the landscape. They're part of the fabric of society. I didn't grow up with them. Many of you here did not grow up with them, and so we didn't learn as children the etiquette. Right? We have to produce our own etiquette relative to this issue. I think suppressing it, you're going to have significant pushback from secondary leaders and from parents. Parents at school, or hey, I'm not going to be there. You're going to have to put dinner, or whatever those things were. They could do it during that window of time and not distract them doing it throughout the day, which I promise you does occur if that strategy isn't put into place. And so, and I'm guilty of it as well with my own children, because we have a lot of moving parts in our family, like a lot of working families, and we're trying to make it all work, and things change and evolve throughout the day. It's not possible for us to, for me, it's like call Dustin James at Lakeside every single time I've got a challenge. So I know when my son's lunchtime is, and I hit him up there. I try to hit him up before, he gets to the bus, those types of things. So what I hear from the communities of people working in the schools, we recognize that cell phones are a distraction in the academic environment. Around that, I think there's little debate. To me, no question. But how do we allow to sort of learn to live with this technology in a way that's fruitful and productive and not draconian and still pragmatic and manageable, right? Because that's the idea. We don't have an infinite number of resources around which we can do this, because what would happen in my experience was we would have students who were A+ jam-up kids who were getting in trouble only for cell phones. They were becoming criminalized because of cell phones, not an academic issue, not any other behavioral issue, because of that. They were accruing disciplinary records based on the cell phone when they were texting their mother. And that, to me, that seemed ridiculous, and I wanted to address it. And I felt like we did a very, very good job where it was no longer a distraction, at most, a minimal distraction. But that's a classroom management piece for teachers, not an administrative oversight piece, in my opinion. So, I think if you talk to any administrator at the secondary level, they'll say it's different. Now, if Mrs. Tito or Dr. Sanders want to weigh in, elementary is quite different. I heard very strongly from the elementary principals, it's much more manageable to have it completely, I guess they just don't have them as much. I'll defer to you on that. You were involved in
So
conversation.
it isn't the same kind of concern or issue because the students are staying most of the time in self-contained classrooms all day or teaming. So basically it usually stays in their backpack powered off. That's usually the policy and procedure. So that was not an issue as a principal that I really counteracted too often.
Our rule as well when I was a principal was cell phone, if it has to come to school, because many parents do want them to have it for safety reasons, then it is powered off in the backpack. It cannot be powered back on until you leave the gates of the school. If they were, we didn't have issue with this. If it was caught ringing or if a student, it was out, then it was just, turned off, put back in the backpack, and then the teacher would handle that as a call home, talk to the family about it, and there would be some type of, consequence as part of the management system of the classroom. But yeah, it didn't take a lot of my time in elementary school, and I was at we were both at pretty large elementary.
It's just different in secondary for I think obvious reasons. I just ask the board to always consider when you're asking for administrators to do one other thing, what are we taking away so that they can do this one other thing if it's prioritized? Because they can't do everything. There's just not enough of them. There's not enough of them to do what they need to do right now. And so my rule always, for myself personally in this role, is what am I taking off the plate before I put something on the plate of my other people who serve me well? So that's what we heard from the focus group. If you have any other questions,
I do have a question. Where are the days where, because, I guess calculating it in my head now, it was quite some time, but I didn't graduate that long.
Okay.
That long ago.
Rub it in.
I'm not gonna do the math.
I'm 32, but anyways, if my mom needed to get a hold of me, she would call the front office, especially at a high school. And do we not have office aides? Is that not a class period anymore?
You can certainly do that, but I think what Mr. Daly was trying to point out is.
But hold on, this is my point though. My mom didn't call the office to be like, hey, make sure you unthaw the chicken when you got home for me to cook.
What I would say to you is that
It's just, it would be unnecessary communication until, okay, at 2:42 I get out, or 1:42 I get out of school, my mom could call me and be like, hey, by the way, unthaw that chicken for me.
my response to that is that communication and the expectation of communication that's quick and clear and always available has evolved in many aspects societally.
Right.
And I think with parents especially, that I think you're going to find out what parents think about this issue if you go forward.
And we're
with
not
such a
saying you can't have your cell phone,
No,
don't have it.
I
It
think
will
we've gone
be
off track.
available. Yeah, it will be available.
It's in their
just-
backpack
listen,
available.
Sometimes, and I'm not saying everybody, but sometimes your text can be a distraction because it was just unnecessary for you to text that, you know what I mean?
Or how about in transition, in a closed hallway, everybody's on their cell phone, slowing down.
And it makes it to where kids aren't looking up from their lunch plate and communicating with their friends. People are no longer
I
friends
urge you
communicating.
to go and sit through a senior high lunch.
Well, I have.
Or one without cell phones, because those don't exist anymore, but the ones with it, very different scene.
It doesn't mean it's right.
One chaotic, difficult to manage, the other, and almost, because we worked this out with our teachers, and we went from
But how do we manage
chaos
that? That's what I'm saying.
to
How do you
manage.
manage that without a cell phone?
We used to
We
manage
need
it
to
without
be
cell
able-
phones.
Right. Before, I wasn't allowed to have a cell phone.
Well, then I
at school.
stand ready to,
You know what I
for the
mean?
professional learning.
And guess what? You know who my administrative staff was? These individuals,
Yeah.
Miss Trotman left, but there was a group of 4 of you, and
I think
You know, I'm
times
trouble.
were, I know you want to think it was a couple of years ago. But yeah, it really has evolved, and of course, I will tell you that even during my last principalship, I had a stricter policy related to cell phones. That doesn't mean that I don't recognize where we are societally. And I think that parents really are wanting the availability to their students. But the question is, I don't think you could do the office things, because I'm sure the Dailies communicate with their two children in the system. The third one's in college now, every day about when soccer practice is and when it's been moved, and when the game is, and did you bring this, and did you do that, and all those kinds of things.
Well, you can text or leave a voicemail all day long, and then at the end of the day, the cell phone comes on and they get every message that you left for them. I don't see why that's really an issue. Because the kid's not gonna do anything about it at 11 o'clock in the morning when they're in class.
All I'm saying is this cultural shift, I get what you're saying, it's not good for our kids. It's not.
May I say
And
something?
we basically are giving up, oh, it's just too hard to manage, or I don't communicate like I used to, where I know where to be at the right time. Every teacher has a phone in their classroom. So I'll leave it at this because I've said my piece. But basically, every time society changes and culture changes, if we know something is bad for kids, and we know it affects them, their mental health and their academic performance, and it's only 6 hours a day, and our best solution is they just need to have it, then I guess that's our best solution. I have a problem with it in transition. One, because you need to get to class on time. That's a real problem for me. I do not have a problem, Mr. Daly, with it being used at lunch, where you could communicate to your son at lunch every day. I have a problem with, we have 6th grade in elementary school. That's a whole different class of kids sneaking around on their cell phones wherever they can. So, in the event that there's cultural shifts, whether it's good for our kids or not, I just want to go on record by saying, sometimes when things are hard, they're hard for a reason. And that if the cultural shift went this way, I wish we could change it back where education becomes more important than the ease of keeping a cell phone. That's my last say.
I'm sorry, if I may, I totally agree that they're a distraction in the learning environment. I'm not a big fan of technology. I think it's sometimes people are good. From a practical lens only, if you have a high school, 2,000 students, 1,800 students or whatever, and they're transitioning, and hundreds of these kids all have these in their hands, what are we going to do? Are we going to stop some of them, but not all of them, indiscriminately grabbing them, telling them to put them away? What happens when they don't? They're all going to go and get a what? A referral? A referral on what? How much is the referral worth? Is that going to bog down the administration in terms of doing discipline, so they're spending their time adjudicating discipline?
Until you train them that in real life, they're going to have to follow rules.
It's just, if you take your hand and put it there, there are going to be repercussions that are going to take away from other things. What other things are we going to take away from to address this issue? That's the real life consequence of that. You can do it, but understand other things will be left undone. There's not enough people to do the work.
I don't see there being work if we didn't have a gray area. Eventually, culture shifts.
If you say there's no cell phones in transition, you have hundreds of kids.
Why do they need it on that 3-minute period?
What are you going to do?
Text your friend the answers to the test? I mean,
I think the question, and this was something that I noted when I looked through the draft of the policy, the discipline for it is not spelled out. Now, the reason that it would not be spelled out in the policy, obviously, is because it's being addressed only in the classroom, so it would be at the purview of that teacher to escalate the discipline as necessary, depending on if I tell you to put the phone away and you comply, that we may leave it there, but if you continue to rebel, then that becomes defiance and you would escalate the discipline from that point. So I get why you wouldn't put it in this policy, but I think to Mr. Daly's point, how are you going to discipline? What will be the enforcement piece? Because that does have to be spelled out in policy if it's something that's outside of the classroom.
So how about
Well,
however many times then you get your phone taken away and your parent has to come get it? Because then the parent now has to leave wherever they're at and or.
I mean, we used to take it away and they stopped using it. They just, I'm not going to get my phone taken away.
Right, but the parent, then has to go up to the school. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if it was my child, I'd be like, you pull out your cell phone again and I have to come up here and get it, you're not getting it anymore. I mean, I know I parent differently, however, you've inconvenienced me as a parent now. And now
That's the policy at my kid's school.
Right,
It's
and
a
now I'm
K-12,
mad.
we have high school students there, and the policy is, if I see it, I take it, the administration, if they see it, they take it, and then the parent has to come retrieve the phone at the end of the day. So, like, I don't disagree with you on that, but when I compare what I've seen in enforcement of this policy, the number of students is much smaller than at a high school where you have 2,000 9th through 12th grade students, all with cell phones. So that's the portion of it, and the ratio of an administrator to that number of students, policing that in the hallway and in the cafeteria, that enforcement piece is very different. And if you're not consistent across the board with every child, then you run into an even bigger issue of, well, why are you picking on my kid? That kid has their phone every day and they get away with it. You see what I mean?
And the removal of the child, you can remove the child from that school or that setting, and the other schools within the system cannot simply remove the child from the school.
If I can clarify a few things. First off, on the page that you're looking at right there, you'll see that it was elementary, and then on the next page it was secondary.
Yeah.
All right, now it's all students and then secondary only. So the transition in the cafeteria is only for secondary students, it's not for elementary.
So what if we bump that to high school only?
Yeah, and not
it's
junior
not
high.
junior high.
We can talk about that with the junior high principals, and I'm not sure if Roger has any input on that with the junior high principals versus the high school principals.
Because at that point, they're not driving, they're not, I mean, there are sports, but the majority of them are staying after school for that sport, right? You're not
I'm
having
thinking
to.
enforcement portion of it, your ratio, the number of students at a junior high is smaller than at a high school. You may, I don't know what the ratios are, administration to student. Is it different, Mr. Broski? At a
It
junior
would
high?
be, junior highs would have 3, potentially 4 administrators, depending on the size of the school.
Right.
Like Asbury, pretty big.
Like Asbury Junior High is very big,
Yeah,
and Oak Leaf Junior High is big as well.
The other thing, if I can also say, is one of the things that we, I want to say it's about 5 or 6 years ago, there was an actual cell phone violation that was listed when students would get in trouble for cell phones. That violation, for whatever reason at that particular time, was taken out of circulation. So the other thing that's been put into the code of conduct this year is there is now a clear wireless communication device violation. So what's been happening up to this point, at least for the last few years with Synergy, is administrators have been coding it depending on the school in different ways. Some of them it's been done as a violation of classroom rules, others it's been inappropriate conduct, it's been possession of an inappropriate object. So one of the things that we also tried to do this year by putting that code back in was to actually track the number of violations, so we would have a much clearer statistic to address what's actually going on moving forward.
So what I'm hearing you say, and what we mentioned before, this is a bear. I mean, this is something that, you let enough leash loose, pulling it back in is going to be a battle. And so I think, I get that method too. However, we're also dealing with a lot of other issues besides just this one. So I see, from your perspective, this is a step in a direction, and I love the idea of being able to track this more efficiently and make adjustments as we move forward in following years. That this is if you can look at it as a fluid document. And here's another point that I just thought of. We get so frustrated all the time with unfunded mandates from Tallahassee, right? How is this any different? We're now making a new mandate, but we're not giving you any new personnel to help you address this mandate. I mean, I think about the library book issue and what a phenomenal job our staff has done with that, but how much of a heavy lift that was for them when there's no additional support for it. So I think that as a board, to responsibly change policy in a way that is so drastic and so countercultural, that it really is going to require a very strategic, methodical approach so that our staff doesn't feel overburdened and unsupported, and so that our students and our parents understand the direction we're moving in.
But we are changing and amending the fact that it can't be used at all during classes, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, and so my question also, Doc, if we were to, sell that piece of property or something like that, would we be able to, purchase more Chromebooks so that we have 100% one-on-one?
Ethan, why don't you address where we are one-on-one?
That's actually an interesting question. If you actually look at the number of students we have and the number of Chromebooks that we are at one-to-one. However, because you have classroom sets and they are not assigned to individual students, then you have a discrepancy if you have a class where maybe in their first period class they have there's 30 students in the class. They move on to their second period class and there are 12 students in class. Of course, you have to have 30 Chromebooks for both of those, even though the class
So
sizes are
you might could
smaller.
go next door and use the teachers next door.
That's what you do in secondary school. You just say, I have a test, can I borrow your Chromebook?
So that's what I was wondering. So if we're essentially at one-to-one, then
Yeah.
this shouldn't be any problem.
It's not hard.
No, the technology piece won't be a problem.
Okay.
Well, I like what has been done here as far as the changes. There are schools that do not allow cell phones, believe it or not.
Yeah.
My biggest issue is, besides the books, mental health. We're back to that. We've got a lot of students with suicidal tendencies. And we know that the cell phone is a majority of the culprit. And I think you mentioned we only have a student 14% of the time. I would like to see the top line under all students. Students may have electronic devices on school property, but in their backpacks.
And here's another thought.
Secondary, that's separate, and we do have to do something different. I would like to see them socializing and talking, because they don't have those skills when they get to employment. And, we want to coddle them and give in, but I could see, as has been mentioned, if that cell phone gets given to an assistant principal or principal, and the parent has to come get that cell phone. And yes, it will be a nightmare.
It actually wasn't, because people knew what was gonna happen. It was like you got rid of the gray area. And so if you took one child's cell phone, called the parent and made him pick it up, you didn't have another problem for weeks in that class, because no one wanted their cell phone taken away. It was really the seriousness.
It's all about the mental health
Yeah.
side of it, and we continue to have disciplinary problems. And yet, we say we have them, but what are we gonna do to address them? So, I like what we've done here, but, I just have to have real concerns.
I think what I'm hearing is that we all feel like we need to do more. But I do think this is a good starting point. And I think we need to think about, I think things like every year, at least once a year, there needs to be some sort of communication, whether it's a meeting or a note home with a student that talks about appropriate use of electronic devices and the problems that we're seeing with it from a school district perspective, because a parent doesn't see things from a school district perspective. So I think there's a portion of community education that we're responsible for as we, like I said, start to make a shift in something that's a cultural norm. And then I think beyond that, it's going to take training our staff into how do we address this. I know at my school where I work, the grade level chooses a staff member for each day of the week to have lunch with that grade level. So there's an adult with every grade level, a teacher with every grade level, and we're sitting with them, having conversation, monitoring their conversation. With kindergarten, you're opening catch-up packets. But it's, all the way up through, right now, my job, I supervise 7th and 8th grade during their lunch, and they have a little bit of a free period. But it's that, like you said, there's such a disconnect relationally when we have devices as accessible as they are. not just at school, but at home, at the dinner table. We've all experienced that interruption of family time at the dinner table because of mom or dad's cell phone or some kid's cell phone. But I think there's a retraining that has to happen, and it's the adults that have to do that. So,
I'm not allowed to have my cell phone.
I mean, when they graduate and go to work, they'll be retrained.
It's a rule in the house.
Well, and that's the thing, this is also an adult problem. This isn't just a kid problem, this is a teacher problem, this is an administrator problem, this is a everybody problem. So.
and it's
it's gonna be a culture shock
modeling
for
that
all of them.
behavior for your students. I know, like I said, where I work, my cell phone stays away.
I mean, I've
Kids at
seen
school never
teachers
see
on
me
cell
my
phones
phone.
in the hallway, so we don't even model. Some people do, some people don't. It is a real problem.
So how about this, with boards and commission, we address the issue in that way? The class time, addressing the modeling of that with the adults. And then we reevaluate where we are at that point, and we go from there. I'm just trying to bring a wrapper to the discussion today, on the issue. I think we all recognize on the issue. I've stated my personal belief, on it. And at the same time, the actual managing of the schools is a whole other issue. When culturally, meaning with the parents that we serve as well, too, are perhaps have a different view of the issue. So.
I do have one question. I see, where it's banned that you cannot take photos or videos of other children. What is the discipline action that happens?
What level is that?
It'd be a level 3 violation, and that would allow for anything from school-based consequences all the way up to off-campus suspension and a recommendation for expulsion.
Okay, and that determination is made by the administration?
The administration, and certainly if there was a recommendation for expulsion, it'd be seen through the hearing office and then upwards of the school board if it made it.
It's not every situation is the same. I might go to approach the student, and the student says something to you. It could be an unmentionable thing, and that obviously creates a whole different disciplinary incident.
Right.
So they're not all the same using cell phones.
Right. I just think it's important to be aware of, that to me is what's scary as a mom. I don't allow my children to have cell phones and social media, but not every parent operates that way. And I spoke with a mom who called me yesterday because her daughter was photographed by somebody in a very unflattering manner at school, and was posted to social media talking about her weight. And that kind of stuff happens. It's not like that's uncommon, unfortunately. And so I just, as a district, I want to make sure that when we become aware of a situation like that it's dealt with swiftly and with some real consequences.
Level 3 is pretty.
Schools have been extraordinarily responsive to situations like that, and something like what you're describing would even get into a bullying and harassment type of situation, which of course there's zero tolerance.
Right.
Okay, are we good with that discussion? Okay, on to the next one, dress code. So on dress code is one of those same sort of challenging discussions that was brought up by the board previously. You can see the red parts there are the changes to the current dress code. There was some revamping in the sense of combining things. Like, for example, rather than trying to spell out every type of head covering, we just called it head covering. There was some more common sense language that was there. Also, the options of what happens at the end was put there. So dress code is one of those things where it's always an enforcement sort of issue. I can always remember as a principal that one of the challenges was every teacher looks at it slightly differently, right? And so some teachers are much more forceful in the application of the dress code than others would be, making consistency a real challenge. I would say this, the number of discipline referrals related to dress code has actually gone down, and there's more enforcement of it. I recognize that not everybody, my fashion sense is not good. Sue tells me that all the time. And so I kind of I look at it and I think, okay, for me and everyone else has a different view of it. Clearly, we don't want students to be inappropriately dressed. Our dress code, by the way, has been successful in the sense that much litigation has been brought forward, particularly in other districts that neighbor us, related to this particular issue. And we've been successful at managing our dress code because one, it's unisex. There is no sexual description, which seemed to be the litigation piece of it related to other districts that surround us. So with that, I'll open the floor.
I just have two things, actually. The dress code at the thigh, that was good, because now we don't have to measure. And we got kids holding their little arms up trying to, all right, so if we look at short dresses, skirts, and then it says middle thigh, if leggings are worn, then the top must come to the middle of the thigh. Well, leggings, jeggings, skinny pants, they are all the same thing. And I know for a fact I do not wear my shirt all the way down to my middle thigh when I wear a pair of jeans. They're almost all the same thing now. I mean, I would say that the shirt to the thigh, you can't even buy those, which is limiting a lot of choices for our kids or parents, affordability of clothes. Honestly, if somebody's wearing leggings that are see-through, then that would be a dress code violation. But jeggings, if we're gonna put leggings, we need to change it to jeggings, skinny pants. I would suggest that we use our common sense, and if something is offensive, then it gets reported as a dress code referral. But the shirt to the thigh over a legging is the part I have, like in modern right now. Half of my wardrobe is like that. So I don't think we need to have a shirt to a thigh with a skinny jean. I'm just gonna put that out there for conversation. And my only other thing is, why did we forget to mention sunglasses for a reason? Because I know kids are trying to always wear sunglasses, and we always said they could wear them outside in the sun. That wasn't on here, so I don't even know what our policy is about sunglasses. And the last thing is, why did we take off pajamas and slippers? Like, why are we allowing that now? And that's all I have, if someone could help me with that.
Do you want to address
Yeah, so the thinking behind the pajama pants was that through our study, and there was a lot of discussion, this was actually in the group that we had for Code of Conduct and Handbook, one of the things that we found the greatest agreement on was the difficulty in differentiating between what is a plaid type of pant with an elastic waistband that could be sold in the young ladies section or the young men's section at Kohl's versus an actual pajama pant, that you might find, in a bin at Walmart or Target or something like that. So really getting down to the granular for a school staff or an administrator to have to get as granular as to try to identify what the difference is between what I previously described and a pajama pant has become very difficult, and I think has created a lot of challenges. The other thing is that, in terms of trying to seek some level of appropriateness, and I'm going to use the term modesty if you'll allow me to do that, we felt like the pajama pant, although the concern being that it creates maybe a sort of lax atmosphere in a school, that that's one of the things that does provide a great deal of coverage on the body. And so, again, figuring out the difference between what are plaid pants that might have a pajama pant-esque type of look to them and what are actually pajama pants is a difficult thing to try to figure.
So the adults that were worried about, they wouldn't be able to make the distinction, because pajama pants are really not appropriate anywhere, and they never will be at work, unless you're in your room at home or in your living room.
It was more that
what
we
about the
couldn't
slippers?
find it. It was more that we couldn't really find a good working definition. And of course, I'm not in the fashion industry. I've only been an educator. But I say that in all sincerity, that we actually have had instances like this come up. Most notably, a situation in the last month at one of our elementary schools where you know, I sat down and actually had a lengthy conversation, multiple conversations with a parent whose daughter had a situation where she was dress coded for pajama pants, but the father actually brings to me documentation, and we looked, and these pants, which do look like pajama pants, and that's how I probably would have labeled them, in fact, are something that you would purchase in the girls' clothing section. I'm gonna go back to Kohl's, because that's in fact what actually happened. And so, again, my ability in the 6 hours and 12 minutes that I have.
I don't think
with
this
kids
is
on
very
campus-
often, by the way, that someone's actually wearing a baggy pant that looks like a pajama pant. In my experience in junior high and high school, you can tell a pajama pant. I just feel like that's Pandora's box. There is such a thing in real life as appropriate dress, right? I mean,
Yeah, we could, well, you kind of hear like the discussion almost.
Yeah.
Kind of like we're sitting here spending 3 minutes explaining the difference, and the parent having multiple meetings.
I mean, what is this,
over
like
this. Right, we're trying to
0.000%?
educate students, and that is still the mission of what we try to do here.
Yeah.
It's not cell phones, dress code, or anything else. It's educating students. So I don't have a problem with that, keeping that in there. I'm just saying this is a group of 12
What about the
people.
slippers, which are dangerous? Kids wearing slippers?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things also that we felt like was just good policy is the more specific, and as Mr. Brodsky mentioned, we took out some of the specifics about actual like specific head coverings. There were several types of head coverings that were mentioned. And what we felt like is, in some instances, when you're trying to execute and apply policy at the organizational level, that having some generality in there actually allowed for more latitude when you're applying the policy for safety purposes, for modesty purposes, for appropriateness purposes. And so we felt like we kept, or maybe even strengthened, some of the language about giving administrators or the principal and the principal's designees discretion over things like appropriateness and safety, while pigeonholing ourselves by, I think, getting overly granular in the listings of different items that were prohibited.
Yeah.
Because the more granular you get when you're listing all of these items, the more room there is to say, well, this particular item that I'm using that you might not feel appropriate, you know, Mr. Jones or whomever, it's not in your list here. And so that's one of the things we've run into. So we felt like, again, becoming a little bit more general in the policy allowed for maybe a more effective application of the safety
For the
piece.
adults, that's all true. I'm not gonna debate that, but kids are reading this.
And you put etc.
Kids are reading it.
So, I mean, that means like a plethora of things. I mean, you don't have to be that direct.
There's
So
no limits at all.
I think that we need to put that back in there. Because I would not send my kid to school in pajamas and think that she was gonna have a productive day at school.
Especially in secondary, I mean, you're gonna leave school and have to dress appropriately. And this is not a high percentage, by the way, Ms. Skipper, of people that Mr. Jones is talking about. This is a very, very small percentage, but when you're looking, I'm listening today mostly from the adult perspective and what administrators' problems they're having. If I'm a child, I'm looking at this, everything's free-for-all right now. Every single thing is a free-for-all when it comes to that section, except for the head covering part. And I don't know, you guys have kids, right? I mean, like, if it's not spelled out and it's gray, what do? They just do it.
But here's another thing also I think that we're all forgetting, is that we have to prepare these individuals for life after school. And I know it's easy. I could have listen, I've taken every hard road because I'm the most hard-headed individual. If you know my husband, my mom, they will both tell you. Just because it's easy doesn't mean it's the best way. And if we are setting a precedence that these kids can show up this way in a professional environment, then guess what? When they go to a job, they're going to be the most sloppy dressed individual. And I mean, I hate to say it, but we all know that in our work environment. There's always that one. And you kind of want to go up to them and be like, did you dress like this in school? I just feel that, like Ms. Hanson is saying, you give them a little bit and they're gonna.
We give them no direction in this
Yeah,
at all. They can wear whatever they want.
Children need direction, they need stability, they need structure, and we're not setting up for them to, I mean, you have kids now, and you can't say you don't, because I've already been to the schools to see it. I mean, they're wearing crop tops. I mean, it's just, and I get it, I mean, what battles do you fight? But you can't wear a crop top in a business environment, or a nursing field, or, you know, all these other places. And sometimes I do go and I see some of these young children, and they go to job fairs or college fairs or whatever, and my mind is blown. Who taught you that that was okay? They can't even shake a hand and look you in the eye anymore. And again, I know I graduated a good amount of time ago, but it still hasn't been that long ago. And I just feel that we need to look at a bigger picture, at the bigger picture here, that even though it's gonna stink, we need to look at each child not as a whole number, but as an individual that we need to take under and educate them and teach them. And yeah, not everybody's gonna dress the same way. I'm not saying that. But we need to let them know that it isn't appropriate to come to school that way, that it's not appropriate to act that way in society, and it's not appropriate when you go for a job interview, or college, or to create your own business. If you walked into a construction office and a guy's got his leg up on the chair sitting in his pajamas, would you hire him as a contractor?
Well, you know how you said it's hard to distinguish between, I know what kind of pants you're talking about, and a pajama pant. You're gonna have the same problem with the leggings. So the
just to
leggings,
reiterate-
jeggings, and skinny pants, you're gonna have that same problem.
Again, just to reiterate in all of these things, this is not a promotion of a laxed informal dress. This is a larger umbrella with which administrators could execute appropriate dress more effectively because of creating some latitude for them there.
When you say top to mid-thigh though, you know how many administrators, do you know how many kids wear leggings, jeggings, and tight pants without shirts to the thigh? That's gonna be a huge problem for administrators. I mean, that part alone, if you're gonna expect all the kids to wear a shirt to mid-thigh when you can't even buy a shirt to mid-thigh, is gonna be a way bigger problem than a pajama.
So just to clarify, I want to understand your position on this would be that we should become a little bit more liberal in our enforcement of the allowing the more stretchy, loose-fitting pants without the covering?
Well, everything is tight
Just so I
now.
understand.
We can't buy coverings that, I'm just saying that it's impractical. You're gonna have to call a dad and say that they're wearing leggings, he's gonna tell you they're wearing jeggings. You're gonna say they're wearing jeggings and they don't have a shirt down, but those are skinny pants, I don't need a shirt down to my thigh.
So again, I want to this was a hypothetical that came
would
up
just like
because
modesty to me.
we had many high school representatives and secondary representatives on the committee. Again, I feel like our position as a committee was that we felt like we needed that latitude in there, because given that this is a unisex dress code, we're going to have situations where you may have a very stretchy material, and again, this is never a conversation I thought I'd have as an educator in 2 decades in this, but there are situations where you could have very stretchy material, too tight fitting.
But that would be under non-appropriate, right?
Absolutely, but again, we need to have that latitude. The thinking was we need to have that latitude in order to maintain at least a base level of modesty on campuses. Now.
No, I totally get it. Let me try to rephrase something.
Can I interject?
I'm trying to say that jeggings, leggings, they're all the same thing, okay?
What if we just added one word? What if, where it says,
Because no one's gonna wear a
if
shirt to their
leggings
thigh.
are worn,
I'm trying to make it easier for you.
where it says if leggings are worn, then the top must come, I would say if transparent leggings are worn, or see-through, I don't know how you
If
would word
leggings,
that, but
jeggings, or tight
just adding
skinny jeans
that,
are
'cause
worn,
that will delineate it from,
appropriate coverage.
are we considering athletic leggings to be, what are athletic leggings considered?
Because everybody wears these pants, I mean, everybody.
What athletic leggings are.
They're not gonna wear a shirt to their
Okay,
thigh.
so, women generally at the gym, if they're wearing pants.
Understood, like a
They're
yoga
leggings,
pant or something
yes,
like that.
uh-huh.
Yeah. So that would be considered, that would fall into this, that we wouldn't have, yoga pants being worn about. That would be considered
So
leggings.
okay, so that would be leggings.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't.
But
I have a
again,
problem with the shirt to the thigh thing,
in my
because
research, I think, again, this is so granular into this, so please forgive me in my ignorance, but in my research into this, differentiating a legging from a jegging, there are some actual definitions out there on that. And the jegging piece is that there are, I don't remember the technical fashion term, but there is a riveting or a stitching. Okay, now, can they be, what's the difference between a jegging and a stretchy jean that's made by American Eagle?
This is my point. Are we requiring everybody with tight pants that could be see-through when worn inappropriately to wear a shirt to the thigh? That's all I'm asking.
No, ma'am.
So as this reads,
because I wouldn't, again, if I were
it's very difficult.
as the vice principal at Lake Asbury Junior High School last year, I would not have conceived of a jegging as being leggings. That would not have comported with me. And I think.
Did anybody ever wear a shirt to their thigh? With tight pants?
Mary Tyler Moore.
I mean, I taught at Oakley, but I'm just here to tell you, nobody's wearing any shirt.
Coming out of a school last
Referring to
year.
the thigh or to cover the buttocks?
Ma'am,
It says mid-thigh.
Which are you, maybe that could be a clarification.
could you repeat the question?
Are you referring to in the dress code when you say thigh, are you referring to the top where the
Says
shirt
middle
would
thigh.
cover the buttocks? Or are you actually talking about, maybe that would help
This is a
clarify
long
for
shirt.
Ms. Hanson.
You have to
She
buy.
wants you to just cover the
the
butt,
long tunic.
Right.
because you're
Yeah,
wearing a
you have to
nightgown
buy
at
a
that point.
tunic.
So
She's trying
this
to
would
say.
be, if we don't like the term, maybe the term shirt in and of itself is maybe creating the confusion
Because this would
here.
be a tunic
This would
in
be
your
any
fashion
top.
design.
Any fashionable top that would be covering a person's torso and their buttocks
should be
area, that would need to go down. That could be something like a shorter dress or any top, whether it be a shirt or anything that you would consider to be a top torso covering.
Like a tunic.
I mean, mid-thigh though, that's,
She just wants you to change it from mid-thigh
It-
to like thigh,
how about just.
to cover the butt.
Yes.
Because you're talking
Define
about
that.
a mid-thigh.
It's
you have
a
t-shirt that goes
tunic,
down
it's
to
a
here.
dress.
And so like if you're not gonna wear a dress and you wanna wear an oversized t-shirt, as long as my bottom is covered, then what does it matter, as long as it doesn't go to here, cause now I'm wearing a
You can't
nightgown.
even buy tunics.
You know what I mean? As long as the kid's not like tying it up here and their bottoms are showing. You know?
So I think
So
it's
she's
certainly to
fine.
the board's discretion. What I want to be clear on before we include any additional policy or wording in here, what the board is suggesting is that we bring the hemline of the covering up even higher when there are stretchy pants being worn.
Well, of course, so you cannot buy tunics. What we're requiring here, I'm just telling you, everybody's gonna break this dress code.
Michelle, just say
We're just
thigh.
gonna break the
Just
dress code.
Instead of mid-thigh, just say thigh. Will that fit? Because then it
Does
covers
anybody
the buttocks
understand
and
that
it
you
touches
can't
the
buy these
thigh.
kind of clothing?
I think what I'm understanding is that she wants to strike the whole thing. You don't want us to regulate.
Unless
what
it's,
they wear with leggings.
an administrator
It's
sees that it's
fine.
sheer or
It's
see-through.
fine unless you're seeing skin. Is that what I'm understanding?
I mean,
If you can see body parts or skin, then it needs
so
to be
look,
covered
I'm
up,
with
but
you,
otherwise-
Mr. Jones.
Yes, ma'am.
If the administrator looks at it and it's inappropriate, we make a call. But just having on leggings itself is not inappropriate with a short or a long shirt.
And would it make sense also, would it be reasonable to also have the same level of latitude then on the pajama pant type situation? And my thinking, again, and this was not just my thinking, I should say that, in the
I
thinking.
apologize to everybody, but this is one thing I know.
We did have a
The
lengthy
struggle of
discussion in
leggings
our
is
committee.
real.
And the committee feeling was that as much as the concern of a pajama pant creating a lax atmosphere, would yoga pants not also create the same lax atmosphere?
Well, I wear my yoga pants on cruise ships because they're very expensive and nice, but it just depends on what kind of yoga pants. See what I mean?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
get into this big wormhole, it just depends.
I don't think it's necessary
Administrators just
wearing
need to make
slippers
decisions.
and no pajama.
And administrators need to make good decisions, and I have faith in our administrators to make good decisions. I don't necessarily think we have to tell parents to go buy tunics. Honestly, we need to talk to our kids in the beginning of each year. We need to set that standard. Administrators can make decisions based on modesty, or is it appropriate or distracting, like fishnet stockings, we know that's not appropriate. We just take them off. So I don't know what we could do about this part, but I can tell you, we have limited people to a certain kind of pants and a certain kind of top that really is hard. I don't know, I'm tall, I don't know if you guys have tried to buy tunics. It's almost impossible. to buy tunics for all my pants, so.
Does the board have a recommendation on language that you'd like to see?
I don't know how you guys feel about just taking that part out and dressing appropriately, and if an administrator sees something that's inappropriate, the administrator addresses that.
I'd like to add the pajamas back in. That's just my personal opinion.
I'm fine with adding pajamas back in. I think,
And slippers, et cetera, that line.
I think when I read this about leggings, what I read is, if it's skin tight, then you need to have something over it. So whether it's, it doesn't really matter what are qualified. To me, leggings mean that it is as tight as your skin. So if it
Overly
isn't
form-fitting,
form-fitting,
some type of
All my
language?
pants are.
So what if it was something to the effect of form-fitting and reveals undergarment?
I
Or
don't
anatomy,
think it even
something
necessarily
to that
needs to
effect?
reveal their
I am
undergarment, but
skinny
you know,
pants.
leggings are, they don't leave much to the imagination. And so
This is
covering
gonna be
that
a
is
nightmare
not
for your administrators,
an unreasonable expectation, I don't think, for the
as
school
it's
environment.
written.
That's my personal opinion. If it's skin tight, then it should have something covering.
I mean,
So instead of
Mr. Brodsky,
mid-thigh, why don't you
you were
just change the
administrator, I
thigh?
mean, can't we,
Because then it's covering the bottom.
it is gonna be a nightmare to regulate what a legging, a jegging, and a tight pant is.
I think the
With the
middle
appropriate
thigh
shirt length.
portion
It's
is
gonna
to
be a
be
nightmare.
consistent with, because if it's skin tight, what's the difference?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think they're trying to be consistent with, your shorts have to be mid-thigh. If you're wearing skin tight leggings, then you're also gonna be covered mid-thigh. It's consistency.
Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, but I'm just saying, I mean, I would say
And your
thigh, because
comment
mid-thigh
about crop
is
tops, it's covered in here. Shirts must cover the
Yeah,
shoulder and not
now.
expose
in
undergarments.
torso.
Well, it said the midriff before,
Yeah, but.
and now we're adding any part of the torso, because now you have a lot of backless shirts.
So I just need help figuring out that jegging part, because I think it's gonna be real difficult to determine the appropriateness of all three different kinds of pants with the length of the shirt. Yep, Mr. Bickner, do you have something to help?
You've already got in the student code of conduct and also in 4.03 student dress, a paragraph that says in 403, nor shall they be dressed in a manner which causes an interference with work or creates classroom or school disorder.
Right, and so
And the
administrators
same
have to
thing
do
in
that.
the existing code of conduct, it says, clothing, they shall be dressed in clothing is tailored in such a manner that because of fit, design, color, texture, or inadequate coverage of the body does not create a classroom or school
Right.
disruption
So we
as
should leave it
determined by
in.
the
Let me
administration.
take it out.
There are young ladies that I've seen going through the schools and others, parents, who are wearing leggings or yoga pants or whatever that are so tight that there is
Yes.
zero left to the imagination.
Yes,
I'm not talking about panty lines, I'm talking about
Administrator.
no panties at all, whatever.
right.
But they are so skin tight that they're distracting.
And that's not what we wrote here. We
And
wrote
I think if
jeggings,
you
we
have
wrote,
that,
yeah,
what you've already got.
I agree with you. We wrote jeggings with a long top. We didn't write anything like that.
We didn't write
If it's a
jeggings.
if
I
it's
mean
a
leggings.
disruption, it's a disruption.
Yeah.
in effect.
If-
So I think the challenge is when you come up with a definition, the purpose of the definition is to provide clarity. Clearly, right, you've seen the difficulty in enforcement because you all can't agree
Right,
on what should happen, right? I've heard a couple things. I've heard more strict in certain areas, and I've heard less strict in certain areas from the very board, right? So the issue becomes the actual enforcement of it. And I would just say as a principal many times over, I would always get into these discussions with teachers, so the teachers to monitor the dress code and send them to me. Because my response was, when the teachers would say to me, you know, you didn't agree with the old dress code. I said, tell me the person that was sent to me that I didn't deal with. The answer is none. And so it makes it very challenging. So I think I heard some sort of consensus there, putting pajamas and stuff back in there, just so it's in writing for the purpose of clarity. And then the issue of leggings, jeggings, and all the rest,
and tunic tops.
it's very challenging because I think the intent was to have modesty
I know the intent.
related to that issue.
And here's
because it's
the
so
thing, if a parent has a question, you can always talk to your administrator or your teacher to say, is this appropriate?
So we
Is
all
this
want
not?
their shirts to be mid-thigh? Is that where we're going with this?
Well,
Just keep it at
when-
mid-thigh?
When I read this, I read that if a skin tight
Mm-hmm.
bottom, then it needs to have a covering over it, and I don't
Well, that's
disagree
what we
with
should
that.
say. If it's inappropriately skin tight, it needs to be covered. But
Remember,
what
it
we're
needs to
saying
be
now is,
unisex.
yeah, I mean, if it's distracted to the learning environment, it needs to go. I just think administrators can make that call. We don't need to have leggings in there, but, or long shirts.
How do you guys feel about it?
I think it needs to be covered, but, I mean, I just wanna enforce, cause I know some teachers have
Ran
set
over some
people up in the
tutors.
dress code, and some administrators are a little more lenient than others. So if it's handled in the way that you have handled it, whether they believe or not, whatever is appropriate, they need to stick with that.
Could we just say appropriately covered, or
Yeah.
modestly covered, or?
Shorts, dresses, and
Mid-thighs.
skirts should come to the middle of the thigh. If leggings are worn, then the top must appropriately cover the backside.
Or like Mr. Victor said, not
Or
distracted
covered
to the learning
modestly.
environment.
Yeah, covers you modestly.
Yeah.
Cause you want the front side covered too on some cases.
Okay, I think we provided some direction for it. I think we, if anything, we've proven the difficulty in it by our discussion, right? So that's why you would always have these difficulties. 34 years, the same topic has been talked about all 34 years. This is not anything new under the sun. Okay, the last topic, student conduct in the restroom. So there's two parts to this. One is the code of conduct piece, which is the all red paragraph that you see, and the other is a board policy draft. So let's talk about the student code of conduct piece. So we thought it'd be important to, since we were writing a part about using the restroom, which corresponds to your biological sex at birth, we thought it was also, maybe we should kind of delineate some of those other things that are good bathroom habits.
I didn't see hand washing in here, by the way.
We figured we'd attempt to cover it all, though I would be quick to point out there are some things that are just, not written that are understood to be things that people are supposed to do. But since we were including that piece, it made sense to include the other pieces to it. When I thought that I didn't see anything that I would think would create controversy. And so I'll just throw the discussion back.
I have no marks.
What's that?
I have 0 marks on my paper.
All right.
Well done.
Well, we're talking about this one now.
Oh, now that part.
There's no,
No marks on that either.
So we're all good.
I would like to ask, just in the first section, not that it would make a difference, but in the very first line where it says students should, can we be a little more direct and say students will not perform?
On the good top.
Yeah.
students should make every effort to maintain that, she's wanting to do may
So instead of should, just replace it with shall.
or shall.
Yeah, and the only reason is we give too much leeway and
Yeah, that's probably should or shall, yeah.
try to be a little more verbally forceful even though it's.
Wow, that is the best conversation that we've
I
had
mean,
today.
this was so direct and
Serious.
precise.
So let's,
Perfect.
great job, committee, on this one. Now the actual draft policy, you might throw that out there for your discussion. And
I just want to, since I'm bringing this to the board, I just want to say, I agree with taking line 4 out, because I didn't really agree with that. However, I think that this should not be limited to students, I think it should be students and staff, which I asked Mr. Victor.
I don't think.
no.
Yeah, the student and staff part. I kind of,
Or like, I don't want to limit it to students, is what I'm saying, I think it should be for everybody. That, you have to.
we have our staff bathrooms, so, I mean, I'm just, it wouldn't,
Yeah, teachers usually don't.
We don't
go
use their
into the
bathrooms.
Student
Or
bathroom.
locker rooms.
Usually it's a
Well,
single
I mean,
stall.
I don't want it to limit to visitors, and, I mean, you need to go use your designated bathroom. So if a parent comes in and wants to use the boys' bathroom, you either need to use a single stall, or you need to go use the girls' bathroom. That's what I'm saying, I don't want this limited to just students. I want this to be,
And we have bathrooms for them at the front door, male and female faculty bathrooms for parents,
Which are single stall.
yeah.
Number 3, and I've discussed this with Mr. Bittner, but I'm wondering where it says, or different consideration for any reason may, upon approval, should we make that upon written approval? Because how are we going to know?
I've had this type of scenario happen a few times as a high school principal, and not for the purposes of this particular policy, but I did have a parent that came to me and just said, hey, I have an issue with shyness, you know, can you help him out? He feels like every time he goes to the restroom, there's a group of other boys in there. I said, can you help him out and give him another area? Sure, we can give you another area. We'd help anybody out that needed help. I think that was the intent, it might not be.
I'm thinking, how is somebody else that sees this going to know, other than they're gonna say, oh, I had approval? You know, how are we gonna really know that?
Well, it's the administrator that gives the approval,
Yeah.
so either the administrator did or didn't, it's pretty easy to
Typically,
find
like
out.
when we do something like that, we're making an exception, we'll give them a pass.
Okay.
Besides a
I
person
mean,
has
do
a-
teachers still give them in their planner permission to use a restroom? So it should be in there that they have permission.
But if they're using a special restroom, such as a,
Yeah.
you know, such as a clinic restroom or whatnot, we would work that out.
Okay.
Usually there's a.
I just wanted to see the procedure. if
Or you
somebody
could staple a
didn't
little
know.
thing in their planner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the next line where it says by the school or building administration, do we need to be a little clearer, or just leave it as administration? Take out school. Or by the school administration.
Yeah, school administration, because school is a noun.
Well, but we have buildings that are not schools, and there are administrators in charge of those buildings, so I would probably leave all of that language so that the expectation is regardless of which building a student is in, they need approval. Like you don't want, on a field trip for kids to come use, I don't know that we have field trips at the district office, but let's say that we did. They would need approval to use a single stall bathroom by an adult that's in charge of that building, I would think.
Most places now are all single. There's very few places.
Does the word school refer to school personnel? School is just a single noun. Are we referring to people working in the school?
Which number are you referring to?
Number 3, the one Beth just,
so why don't you just put school administration or building?
or school
administration?
personnel or
I mean,
building.
It's kind of repetitive, but
Because
school
staff can
and
give permission too.
board.
I mean,
The way that it's written, administration would apply to either the school or another building.
That's why.
I wrote it that way because we have food, transportation. Any place down here in Green Cove Springs, field houses, athletic areas, things that are not generally governed by the principal, and facilities that aren't governed by anybody other than the administrator of the building. So
okay, yeah.
that's why I wrote it the way I wrote it.
Any other?
Yeah, that makes sense that you'd have like the athletic director
Yeah.
at a school would maybe make a call for a student who needed accommodations for the locker room, or, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, wow, okay. I'm impressed. Okay, so we have one last topic that I'd like to bring to your attention. We need to come up with a date to do interviews for the school board attorney position. And in addition, I would kind of point out that one of the things that we should discuss now is I'd like to bring an agenda item that would rescind Mr. Bickner's resignation so he can stay on longer in the transition. This does not mean that we're delaying hiring a board school board attorney. We would set a date, we'd interview, we'd hire the attorney, but it would allow a transition time. Because as it stands right now, Mr. Bickner's last day is April 14th, and I believe it would be impossible to have a transition within that time frame, given that we're almost to the the end of March right now.
Got a quick question. I think the end of January, we still only had like 3 candidates, and then suddenly we had 13. Are we still receiving candidates?
Ms. Troutman?
The postings are not open. We could reopen the postings. I can say that would require more funding, but that's up to y'all.
Well, we're not, yeah.
So
Are you asking, are the same people still interested?
the same people that I had stated before, the ones that y'all said that you voted on, that you wanted to interview, I emailed all of them. Every one of them have replied that they are still interested, and to simply let them know when the new interview dates will be. If you want to open it back up, but that would take a longer time because it needs to be posted for at least, 2 weeks. I don't think you're going to get much compared to what we got before. And but if you want to, we can absolutely reopen it.
Well, we interview what we have, and then if we don't, it's a nay.
Yeah, because I didn't realize that closed.
You do not have to select one of the ones if you interview and you're not happy with the candidates.
We can go back out and start over.
Correct.
Right. I think that's prudent. We've promised these folks an interview. I think we need to move forward with that. And then, like you said, if we're not pleased after the interviews, we can go to put it back out at that point. I heard from Ms. Bola, she's available just about any day in April to schedule interviews. I don't know if you guys want to look at your calendars now, or if you want some time and we can make a decision at the board meeting
Maybe let's try to pick a date.
today.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's start.
All right.
I can do any Tuesday and Thursday, so like before Thursday.
Tuesdays work best for me.
Okay.
So
Can y'all do the 4th?
April
have
4th
to-
would be very difficult because, I'm sorry, Mr. Ruskin, because of the required posting that we have to put out to advertise it.
You have to advertise.
For how many days?
7 days, and that would be 7 days. So there's a couple of days lag to get it there,
Right.
so they have it in there for 7 days.
So the 11th, is that
I can do the 11th.
too far away, or too short a time than that?
I believe it is. So the Clay Today only publishes on Thursday, and the deadline to submit an advertisement is Monday noon. So the earliest we could submit and have it published would be April 6th. So the earliest interviews could take place would be the 13th.
Okay. So then April 18th.
How about April 12th, Wednesday?
She just
Everybody
said you
open?
can't do it
Tuesdays
till the-
are best for me with my job.
Oh, that's, yeah.
The 18th works for me. If that,
Can everybody do the 18th or the 25th? The 25th is our workshop. If you guys want to tag it on,
The
we can.
18th would work for me.
The 18th would work for you.
Yeah.
So 2 options. We could do it the
What day?
18th, or we could do it the 25th, and then we'd have the agenda review followed by all of the interviews. So if we did it that way, I would just request to the district that we don't add anything to that agenda review workshop, that we just review the agenda. So it should be short and sweet, and then we could move over to attorney interviews and do it all in one day.
whatever y'all want to
The 25th?
What day?
The 25th?
So far away. So is it almost 5 weeks from now? 4 and a half?
Yeah, 4 weeks from now.
That's a long time.
I mean, we could do the, you want to do the 18th?
That's up to you guys. It's just a difference of a week.
You want to do it the 18th? Because the earliest she said you could do it is the 13th.
I mean, Ms. Troutman, that's a long way away, the next workshop, but whenever we do the interviews, what happens after, if we decide on one, what's that timeline like?
They're immediately hired. We would bring a
Yeah, y'all would
contract.
vote on who
So
you
there
select.
I mean, once we vote, what's
So once
that?
you vote, you have a candidate, then we would offer the position to the candidate, then of course, if you're writing the contract, and bringing forth a contract for the board to approve, whether or not there's a layover in time for the new board attorney to start is, it depends on what their current job is and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a time difference there. I would kind of think that maybe the first discussion should be, Mr. Bickner's last day is the 14th as it stands now. I suggested that in order the process to change that is the rescinding of his current letter of resignation. I don't see any, and part of that is that Mr. Bickner has to be willing to do that, and I think Mr. Bickner would, based on my conversation with him, be willing to do that if he knew that he had the confidence of the board in the interim related to that. And so I'd like to hear from the board as to whether or not they're in agreement with that, keeping in mind there is no way you're going to hire another attorney in the time that occurs.
Right.
And, go ahead, Mr.
I think you also need to understand, I have real reluctance to do this. I tendered my resignation with 16 weeks of notice for a reason. My biggest concern is, someone approached and said, well, are you willing to do this? I said, I'll have to go and talk to my wife about it, and I'll have to think about it. I've done both. My reluctance to do this is that if I extend this, I want to go to the end of the contract, which is December the 28th. That's what my contract says.
Yes.
I rescinded and I resigned because there were people on the board that wanted me gone. If I can't have 5 board members that are behind me to stay through December the 28th, I don't want to stay. Do I like my job? I love what I do. Am I overworked? Yes. Do I need a second attorney, which would be the equivalent of a staff attorney, that you could hire with a 2-year experience and get for $75,000 or $80,000? I need that desperately. But what I really need is 5 people that want me here. And if I only have 2 or 3, I can't stay. There's no security there.
Well, it is unfortunate that we had 16 weeks. And we're still sitting here looking at a date a month from now. That is, for me, a month, I mean, I actually spoke with Ms. Gilhousen about this. It's unfair. We should have been able to get the job done. And now what to do to move forward. And when we talk about the 25th, that's another month. I understand where Mr. Bickner's.
But first things first, are 5 of you willing for me to stay here? Can I have a commitment from 5 board members that says, we want you here until December the 28th?
We had a conversation, and you know that I am willing.
I know that you are. I don't know about Mrs. Clark. I don't know about you. I know Mrs. Bola would go along with that, and I don't know about Mrs. Skipper. But that's important to me, and it's important to me for a couple of reasons. Practicing law is a matter of trust. You trust me to keep you out of trouble, and I trust you to watch my back. That's all. And that's what the trust is. And if the trust is broken, if the trust is gone, then I need to know that. Because I do actually have other things that I can do. I'm not tired and I'm not addled yet. And so I'm going to keep, I've had offers to go practice law elsewhere. So if 5 of you don't want me, that's okay.
I think
Just
the
tell me now.
problem for me is putting a December date on it, because if we're having this difficulty getting someone, or even getting to the interview process, how are we gonna, we're either gonna be having somebody on board midsummer, and now we're paying more than we need to be paying for both parties. Putting a date on it is tough for me.
Putting a date on me?
Right.
I understand that. But that's what I have to deal with as well. For you to say it's tough for you because now you got to think about money, so do I. For you, I've had time to sit down and figure out where I'm going and to make plans for where I'm going and places to go. And so I don't really, I'm fine with leaving. But for somebody to say, okay, we want you to stay, but when we get tired of you or when we don't need you anymore, you're gone. That takes away all the security that I have built into the system, which I built into my contract with Mrs. Bola's help, there was security both for the school board and for me. It gave 4 months to find a replacement. It gave me 4 months to find a place to go.
Yes.
That's no longer there if you're gonna do this.
And in all fairness, we have some good candidates. The first 7-day thing, we messed up about the, sunshine, and then we picked a date that we all couldn't be here together. That is not Mr. Bickner's fault.
And if I leave on the 14th, I'm a phone call away.
Yeah.
I have an offer to start on the 21st of April. That's an additional 6 days. If somebody needs me, I come in for 6 days. I don't care. I don't have any hobbies. I work. That's what I do.
I think we should do our interviews as soon as possible. We had 16 weeks. We had candidates apply.
I think the question is, if we do it, we're saying we have to do it, allow Mr. Bickman to stay on till December.
To the end of my contract.
If we interview?
Transition period, how long
Right,
that
but if we get somebody next month, we're not gonna need from April till December.
Why can't we have both?
Yeah, I would,
He can be district and we can have a board.
But I'm burning bridges. That's the
Because
thing. You may not need me after 2 months from now, but I will burn the bridges this week.
Well, what I'm saying
They're going.
is if we keep you till December, I know FSBA has discussed, having 2 different attorneys. So you either have a board attorney and a district attorney. So for the 6-7 months, why don't we do that? We hire our own attorney and then Mr. Bickner can have.
I mean, what's the cost of something like that?
Well, Mr. Bickner just told you, if you hired a staff attorney,
If you hire a staff attorney and you get a newbie out of the state attorney's office, the public defender's office, the general counsel's office, the AG's office, with 2 to 3 years' experience, you can get an attorney that will learn a job for $75,000, $80,000, maybe 85. I'm guessing, but I'm telling you what I think rationally and reasonably, because people in the state attorney's office, public defender's office, and the AG's office are working for under that. They learn something, they have a place to go, and it's important to them, I think, to move on. But they are not the school board attorney. They don't walk in with any knowledge. And so what they have to have is somebody there to teach them. When I came to this job in 2000, Frank Scrooby had sat in that chair for 35 years. He was 1 day a week and 1 night a month. And I sat with him every month for a year. And I did the stuff off job, off site, with phone calls and going to IEP meetings and just everything that I could do to involve myself. So that by the time Frank walked out the door, in all honesty, felt like I knew more than Frank. And Frank had been doing it for forever. So what you need is a staff attorney, because if you think that everything I do all day long is school board work, that's not true.
Well, no,
I've had
from the
15
very
phone calls
beginning,
before I ever walked in the door.
the transition was important to me
How
from the
much
very
would it
beginning.
be, could we modify, because I don't wanna go to the DA, I don't wanna do all of that. I wanna interview the people that that have applied. Could we essentially modify their job, till December as a school board attorney? Meaning we utilize them just for, the school board portion. And then Mr. Bickner keep his contract till December as a district attorney, because this is a thing, they do this. And we hire our school board attorney, and at the end of December, we increase the hours, the job description, the pay or whatever, to a full-time attorney once he is gone in December.
How would they learn? Like, where's the transition?
so there's two things.
Some of them have experience, and then whoever we pick, some did have experience, and then they could resource, and we farm out a lot of our stuff.
Because his knowledge after all these years.
Well, they
the
would
whole
still be
reason-
working alongside
The whole
him.
reason I wanted to do it was because I felt that transition with Mr. Bickner was really the most important thing
Well, that's what, they
for
would
us
be
as a
here.
county.
That's what I'm trying to tell you, they would still be
So the
here.
answer to your question is yes, you can do that, and that is a real thing. Alachua County has that kind of model presently in place. So the question really is, just listening to everybody around, is the way that that's done, by the way, is there's a human resource piece to this. You have somebody that has a resignation letter that's tendered. The process to make that go away is for the board to take action to rescind that. What you heard Mr. Bickner emphatically say is he's got other offers on the table. He loves this place, would like to stay, but needs that commitment of December, which would fulfill his contract. So to answer your question, yes, there would be a consent item for the rescinding of Mr. Bickner's letter of resignation, which would then put his current contract into play. To Ms. Clark's concern about the December timeframe, yeah, I get that, but I also get that it would be a commitment of the board here.
But can we do what I'm asking? Is that a thing?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to
Yeah,
do.
you can.
Can you do that so that we can still interview the people that we want and we can still pick who we want as a board? Still
So-
keeping Mr. Bickner on so he can help with the
Separate
transition.
responsibilities.
Still show the new school board attorney, but at that point, to give him some relief, essentially, they would show up at the school board meetings and workshops or whatever, and you would deal with the district stuff, and they would deal with the school board attorney, so it wouldn't necessarily be a full-time position until December when he's gone. Does that make sense?
So the challenge with that
We need
is that
his
the people
knowledge
that are
right now.
interviewing for the position are gonna want full-time
Yeah.
employment because they're not gonna wanna give up their current
Could we ask them for that? That's what I'm saying, could you modify the position? Is that another so many days? Can we
That's what-
afford 2 attorneys?
Right, I was gonna state that this position was advertised as a full-term,
Okay.
and a salary range was given, so I think it would be, you would have to be transparent to your applicants that whatever it is your expectation is, so that they know whether or not they still want to interview.
Okay. So
And
if we interview them, can we afford both?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we do that? Why don't we extend his contract, interview the people that we want to interview, keep them both on, they can work side by side, he can train them, and go from there, because we're gonna lose money either way.
I'm in favor of that, and what I don't want to lose is continuity, and I fear that if Mr. Rickner leaves on the 14th, and we're in a pinch to hire, what if we interview and we don't want to select any of those candidates? Like, there's a lot of variables here, and I don't feel comfortable leaving the district exposed
Without
legally
any lawyer.
while we're making this decision. So while I understand nobody wants to spend that extra money, I don't see that we have a choice and also provide a reasonable amount
I
of
would
legal
also
services to the
add that
district.
many districts, including Alaska, by the way, do have 2 attorneys.
Right.
I would also add that the Board of County Commissioners actually has 3
Right.
attorneys.
Right.
And we're not like overstaffed in the attorney realm.
Right, well, I just wanna make sure we can afford it, first of all, but then second of all, it is a person of our choosing, the board's choosing. And so, I want that to be, because it's very important, I know it's very important to me because of my viewpoints. So I just wanna make sure that we get to interview who is set to be interviewed.
Yeah, that was gonna be one of, and yes, it's not just about money, but we set the goalpost at December and now still can't make December for some reason. So
Right.
it's not just a money thing, but, I've continued to hear that the attorney is used 90% for the district, 95% for the district. We've got a ton of contracts, that's a big issue. But I also hear that this is our attorney, and this is the one employee that we get to hire. And yet, we're also understaffed in the attorney role. So why don't we look at the 1.5 attorney situation? And we hire who we need for the school board, and we leave the district attorney in place, whatever we need, and at least consider it. So.
Well, I think you bring a lot of valid points. I think for now, the question becomes, what do we do now?
Right.
So clearly, the thing that's been brought forward is rescinding of the current letter of resignation, which would then put his contract in place through December to allow that, over time. But really, it comes down to, I hate to say it this way, it really comes down to Mr. Bickner. Right, so, what say you, Mr. Bickner?
I think what I'm hearing Ms. Skipper say, and what I'm pulling out of this is change my contract so that I am the staff attorney rather than the school board attorney.
No,
And
I'm
then you hire
saying,
your own school board attorney.
no, well, at first, but then they said that we could afford both of you.
Yeah.
So you would both just be alongside each other till your December contract.
So I know one of the things that was a priority to me, we had an internal audit done August 2019 for the half-cent sales tax. And again, they reviewed it in August of 2020. And one of the consistent themes in there was the outdated policies that we had. So one of my priorities was to actually go through the policies section by section. That'll be an immense amount of work if we start to look at every single policy section by section. I think that it would be in the board's best interest to have 2 school board attorneys until Mr. Bickner's contract ends in December, if that's what you...
It sounds like,
And then
correct me if I'm wrong, that sounds like where everybody is.
But he's the lead, I mean, he would have, I think maybe part of your concern, Mr. Bickner, is the role you would play maybe, or
I don't understand.
if you have 2 attorneys, how do you see that working?
I don't have a problem with working with someone as long as I know who they are. Before, when we had 2 attorneys as school board attorney, you had Frank Screwy and myself, but remember, Frank was a one-day, the way it all happened was I brought everything in-house. All of the things we sent out, I brought in, and I started doing all the IEP meetings and all of the IDEA stuff and all the phone calls from the schools and on and on and on, because it made no sense the way that it was set up before. And that's how it came to be a 5-day full-time job. I can do that, and I'm happy to do that. And I've even told Mr. Bosky, if you get to December the 28th and you have a problem, I'm not going anywhere after that. I'm done. I'm 76 years old, and I have other things I want to do besides this.
I hope.
And so, well,
I hope you have other things.
I've got a PhD to finish, and I've got a couple of other. And so, I've told him that if you get to the 28th of December and you haven't gotten there yet, put me month to month. I'll keep coming back until my biggest concern is the district. It's not me.
No, I just wanted to know how you felt about it.
My biggest concern is I think that I'm being treated poorly because I have basically made plans. And I'm going to have to burn the bridges, and I don't like burning bridges. But I can do it.
So what do you
Well, I
think?
assumed we'd be a month-to-month situation anyway. I didn't realize the December. And I would think you'd be in the same boat come December if you're, unless that was
And
your
I planned
final.
on that, but I'm not going to plan on that between now and December. I either want a commitment to finish me out, or I'm going to start somewhere else the 21st of April. And that's
So we
not
have
a
a
threat, and I'm not being ugly.
attorney.
It's the way I feel.
Do we have a model? Something we've done before?
We can.
It just works itself out. So
Because
what do you guys think?
It sounds like I'm gonna consider this consensus, and you can't vote, which would mean this. And I think that means a lot to Mr. Bickner, because when I had the discussion with Mr. Bickner, I don't think you mind me sharing this. He said, I just want to make sure the people that I work for want me to be here, right? It sounds like the consensus is there for that to occur. So on the board agenda,
And we can afford a second attorney.
yes, so there'll be a consent agenda item.
Is that where we're at truly, Ms. Skipper?
Yeah. They can work alongside. I want you guys to be equal, and then you train the attorney or educate the attorney, not necessarily train, I don't like to use that word, but educate the attorney on how things are done, school life, what you do, all that, and that gives us, if we hire them at the end of this month, that gives us enough time between now and then for them to be self-sufficient, either after you leave or whatever we decide from December. But then that also gives you some relief, you know, having two attorneys.
But you're good with me until December, the end of December, the end of that contract.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Clark, are you as well?
Yes, if we can't do a month to month, I
I
understand.
can't do a month to month. There's
I
no
am-
security there at all.
That's what I just said, I was trying to say.
Okay?
Yes.
If I've got 5 people, I'm happy. I'll talk to my wife and I'll let you know in the morning. But it's, I'm
I just
headed
want to
that
say
way.
thank you for your patience, because
Well, I'm
16
thanking
weeks
you,
is a
right?
long
But
time.
The confidence is important to me, because I have all of the people on this wall and all of the people at the schools that call me for, and they have confidence in what I do.
I've
And
learned a
when I
lot
have
about
a
you
vote
since I
of no
started.
confidence from my board, it makes me feel like my employer doesn't want me, but the people I serve do, which
Yeah.
makes no sense to me. I can't do that.
So can I just have one clarification? Did we settle on the date?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I was like, there was discussion. and I
Well,
never-
there's not a major hurry if we rescind his
When is-
resignation, so it could wait till the next workshop, like Ashley
The
said.
25th?
So 25th, Ms. Trout.
18.
The 25th is,
The workshop date.
we're stuck with Mr.
Yes,
Bickner
the
now.
workshop date, so we do the agenda review followed by all of
You
the,
take your
So
time on that,
I will
Overgard.
create a schedule similar to the one I did before and contact all the candidates.
And may I ask, I think, didn't we have just 4 that we were gonna interview? Because I thought we were shooting for 5.
No, there
Are 5?
I think
I thought there was
Because I've
5.
only grabbed,
I will double check my schedule and I will send all of y'all an email with the date and time to confirm.
Are you interested in reopening that at all? Because I know of people that are thinking.
That would be the
so
board's.
if we're doing the 25th, now do we have time to reopen and try to, and what is the
Oh,
cost?
you gotta advertise, don't you? You have to do all that mess again.
And pay for it?
Okay, so we
Yeah,
can't do
no,
it by the
let's not
25th.
do that.
All right.
I mean,
You can hire who
You
you
can.
want. Hiring a professional does not come under taking bids or anything else. You don't have to follow any procedure. It's entirely up to how you want to do it.
Now I'm confused.
I mean, I did have some concern that the
But you
candidates.
still have
When
to
I
give
say
public
advertise,
notice
I'm
for
talking
meetings.
about-
Experience.
Right.
You still have to have an
It's not a
agenda.
bad
You
thing,
have to
so.
do all of those things with the APA. But you don't have to,
so we could reopen it and then we could, we would just have to commit on our part to review those resumes promptly and submit the applicants that we want to interview to
And
Ms.
include the
Troutman.
ones we were going to, is that how
And
that works?
and include the ones that we were going to interview, and then we would need.
So we can get more candidates?
Well, I think what we could do is just reevaluate the whole stack of candidates
Yeah.
and then select the top 5 and submit that to Ms. Troutman. And if we could all do that by April 18th, it would give that, the new applicants a week's notice that we're gonna
just to
interview.
reiterate, it's been 16 weeks.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
a long time.
16 weeks.
I've never,
Ms.
16
Gilhouse,
weeks.
never thought we'd be
And
in
how
this
many times
place.
from the district have we heard that this isn't a popular or job or whatever? Like,
It's been
I
a
just-
long time.
So you don't wanna reopen it?
No.
That's okay,
This
we don't
is
have to
getting
reopen it.
so drug out, it's impeding.
Well, it wouldn't change the timeline at all. We'd still be interviewing on the 25th.
I think that if we don't like who we see, then we open it. Let's get the ball rolling. Like, we've wasted too much time. If we don't like what we see, then we move on and we open it back up. But I mean, these people, you're hanging, I mean, these candidates are gonna think that we're not professional and that we just keep stalling them and dragging our feet. And I mean, to be honest with you, if I was applying for a job and they kept doing this to me, canceling, rescheduling, I just feel like, okay, I'm gonna go look for another job. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
It's professionalism. So I think that we either need to go ahead and interview them and
I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Roski. Well, that concludes the items on our agenda. You have no further comment, I'm
No
assuming.
further comments.